The war between Russia and Ukraine has been roiling now for close to 3 years. As we approach this very momentous mark, the United States, Russia, and much of Europe is heading towards an inflection point. As the new administration for the United States comes in with a different focus and a different perspective than the one that's been waging this war from the United States side for the last 3 years, we don't know what's going to come on the other side of it, because it could have really dramatic changes in which way the war even goes, how much it's supported, how much it's not, what the different actors are going to do, how it's going to play into what's been happening so far. But one thing we are seeing today, and this is just hours ago, there was a meeting of the OSCE in Malta, and two of the biggest headliners were Sergei Lavrov, foreign minister for Russia, and Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State for the United States. And really what we saw on display here is evidence of just why this is going to be such a concerning moment when the new administration comes in, because it's very unclear how we're going to get to a place where something good could come out of it. On the one hand, it seems hopeful and optimistic, because President Trump has said all during the campaign trail that he wants to end the war in a day, as he said before. And even though we know that's a hyperbole, if that's his day one focus is to end the war, that's a good thing. But it also matters how it's done and what the expectations are of the two sides. And the vastly different way that the two sides view this was on graphic display today. And first of all, I think it was the fourth speaker of the whole organization was Sergei Lavrov, and he kind of laid out what his view of the situation and why they're in this difficult place inside of the Russia-Ukraine war, and then we'll see how that contrasts with the other side.
No, we do not want to attack anyone. The United States attacked us by the hands of the Ukrainian regime. They are waging war against us by using the Ukrainian neo-Nazi forces. They supply them weapons. They held them to use long-range weapons against our territory. They are directly involved in preparing these attacks. That was not our choice. And President Putin said that we were left with no other choice but to start the special military operation, because since long they have been promoting this. They were turning Ukraine into a springboard to make threats against the Russian Federation. The biggest problem is that they are not responsible for what they're saying, starting from those agreements between Gorbachev and Reagan and finishing with all the things they said under the OSCE aegis. They promised not to enlarge NATO, and they did not adhere to this promise, and they were signing the documents that no organization across this space will not dominate, and NATO was doing exactly the opposite, and I can cite you a lot of such examples.
So from the Russian side, you see that they say, and Putin actually said this a lot in the opening months of the war, that the West started this war. And of course, in the United States, that was mocked immediately. It's like, well, obviously, Russia invaded their country on February 24th of 2022. So, that they were like rolling their eyes about, well, what a ridiculous thing to say. But you have to look at the definitions and what they mean. Lavrov here expounded on that, not even talking about February 2022, not even talking about 2014, but going all the way back to Gorbachev and Reagan, all the way through the 2008 Bucharest summit, where NATO for the first time expressly said that Georgia and Ukraine would one day be coming into NATO. Then all the things that happened within Ukraine with what the Russians call is a coup, what the United States euphemistically called was a color revolution. Yay, they just chose on their own, and we decided to back the overthrow of a legitimately elected government. I don't want to rehash all of that stuff, but you see that the very different way it's viewed in Russia. And I think that's important also to point out that in their view, and Lavrov said it here, the Russian side felt compelled, like they had no other choice but to launch the invasion on the 24th of February 2022, because everything that had transpired from Gorbachev all the way up through the Minsk Accords and in the early part of 2022, in their view, compelled them to have to take this for their national security. And so their view and their idea right now is that the escalation has been on the Russian side. That the Russians say that the escalation has been because of the Western provocations and actions. Now, that is contrasted by, of course, how the United States sees this. And the current Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, who spoke not long after Lavrov, they were not physically in the same room at the same time. But Blinken then, Gary, if you could throw that headline up there, thank you. Blinken said, yeah, okay, you want to talk about escalation? Noting the recent deployment of North Korean troops in Russia, the use of intermediate-range ballistic missiles, the Oreshnik on Ukraine, attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, and Russia's recent decision to update its nuclear doctrine, which lowered the threshold for enormous nuclear warhead stockpile. And then the quote, Mr. Lavrov spoke about the sovereign right of every member state to make their own choices. Blinken said, that's exactly what this is all about. The sovereign right of Ukraine and the Ukrainian people to make their own choices about their future, not to have those choices made in and by Moscow. So, of course, Blinken's view is this is all Russia's fault. We didn't do anything. We've just been sitting around just being nice people and, and being democratic lovers. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the Russians come and attack. Now, this is not to defend or attack either one of their views. They both have them. I certainly have my opinions on which is closer to the truth. But the point being that you see we are miles away from having any understanding of what the other side did. And they're absolutely at cross purposes. Now, on the one hand, we can say, okay, this is, Blinken's valedictory speech, so to speak. This is his last hurrah on the world stage. There may not be many more big meetings of this sort for him to even make a speech like this. And so that's kind of his exit on the way out. But we need to examine a little bit closely what Russia is saying, because we need to figure out what's going to happen when the new administration comes in. Blinken's heading out, a new one's coming in. But first of all, I want to look at a couple of things that also that this issue here between Lavrov and Blinken has been an ongoing spat. And it's instructive to see what they have previously said, even in just recent weeks and months heading into this, because it's going to set the stage for what is going to be on Trump's plate on January 20th when he takes office. So here is from November 19th. This is Lavrov explaining. This is Lavrov's explanation of the ramifications for President Biden's authorization to use Western long-range weapons from Ukraine into Russia. Here's what he said.
Long-range missiles are going to be applied from Ukraine into Russian territory. It will also mean that they are operated by American experts, military experts. And we will be taking this as a qualitatively new phase of the Western war against Russia, and we'll react accordingly.
Now, he said that he tagged that out, we will react accordingly. Now, 2 days later, 2 days after that, on the 21st of November, that's the first time the Oreshnik missile, intermediate range ballistic missile, was used on Ukraine. That's one of the things that Anthony Blinken was talking about when he said, yes, this you guys are escalating this because you used this ballistic missile. Everything matters, though, about the context. Why was this missile used? What happened first? Blinken didn't mention any of that. He sort of forgot about that part of it, that changed the narrative there, and it changed the escalation, that went another rung up the escalation ladder. Because you heard Lavrov very clearly say, in our view, you escalated by allowing those long range, so we took the next step, which is going to now fire this ballistic missile in there. And of course, that was very much designed to send a message to the West that we have this missile you can't intercept. And this particular one was a conventional warhead, and actually it was an inert. It was basically a large chunks of steel flying at nearly Mach 10, crashing into the ground, which caused some damage, but it wasn't so much that it by itself caused an escalation. It's a note that we can fire this missile anywhere we choose, and there's nothing you can do to stop it if the provocations continue on. Now, that then leads to something that Anthony Blinken himself said actually just a few weeks before this, when he's talking about when he was asked again, what did you think of Lavrov's speech at the United Nations General Assembly in September?
With regard to Minister Lavrov, no, we didn't speak directly, but I was in the room when he made his intervention on behalf of Russia. He was in the room when I made my intervention on behalf of the United States. So I think it's safe to say that we heard each other. I didn't hear anything new, unfortunately.
And now, how can we come to any kind of an understanding if we literally don't even listen to the other side, won't even talk to them, and anything they say, you just automatically dismiss it out of hand? Now, I think part of the problem here, well, there's a couple big ones, is that number one, we think it's 1990. We think that the Soviet Union has just fallen and they're powerless and they can't do anything, and we can literally do or say anything we want, and it doesn't matter how much complaints or yelling or anything else the other side may have. They have no valid points, and we'll just do whatever we want because we set the rules. That's one big problem. But then there's an additional problem here that I guess kind of tails back into thinking it's 1990. We seem oblivious to the capacity on the Russian side. So yesterday, the Secretary Blinken was talking from a NATO meeting, and he's going to lay out here a number of things as what he thinks his view of what the reality on the ground is. We're going to look at this on the backside, but you just get ready. This is going to be a little cringeworthy.
Fundamentally, the extraordinary achievement for Ukraine and for Ukrainians is that this is a country that is still standing strong. Remember what Putin was trying to achieve. He was trying to erase Ukraine from the map. That was the objective, and he has failed. Ukraine has a path where it will stand strong as an independent country, making its own decisions about the future, able to fend for itself militarily, economically, democratically. We have to continue to make the investments necessary to move it down that path, but that is the ultimate success. A strong, independent Ukraine, increasingly integrated with the institutions of the transatlantic community, including NATO, including the European Union.
Okay, look carefully at the date on that. That was December 4th, 2024. If that had been December 4th, 2022, you might have been able to say, all right, I'm going to cut you a little slack here, because Ukraine had just completed substantial military successes. Actually, the probably what's going to turn out to be two of the only three signature successes that they had in the war. The first one being that they fought back so heroically and valiantly in the first stages instead of giving up. In the first couple of months of the war, they had some big pushbacks, especially around the Hostomel airport. They pushed the Russians back in a number of places, eventually causing the Russians to have to withdraw from Kiev, where they had almost three sides surrounded in the initial incursion. That was the big one. And then the other two were forcing Russia out of Kherson City and part of Kherson province. And then, of course, in Kharkiv in the north, where they had this huge swath where Russia was vastly undermanned and had no defenses. And a surprise offensive by the Ukraine side pushed them out. That was the big signature events. And they all happened in 2022. And if Blinken had made that statement at that time, you can say, well, I don't think that's going to be right, because of a whole bunch of reasons that I could have been talking about, incessantly throughout this war, about the fundamentals and why they were still even then on Russia's side. And there shouldn't have been anybody's fantasy about thinking that they were going to reverse this and drive Russia out of the rest of it. But this isn't even that. You can't even get that kind of a credibility right now. And for you to say, standing near the third anniversary of this war, that Ukraine has extraordinary achievement. First of all, he just flat out lies. And I say this is a lie as opposed to misinformation, because sometimes you can just not know what you're talking about and say something's not accurate, but it's a mistake, an error. This one is a lie, because he says Putin attempted to completely wipe out all of Ukraine from the beginning, and they failed at that. He knows for sure Russia never had the military intention to conquer all of Russia, all of Ukraine from the outset. They had just a pittance of number of troops. They entered with probably that actually entered the Ukrainian territory was less than 100,000 on 5 separate axes, 4 main ones, and one was kind of branched off into 2. Which means they were separate and relatively small numbers on all of these axes coming in there. And the total number was maybe 100,000 in the initial onslaught. That's not enough to do anything. No one thinks you're going to take a city of Kiev or Kharkiv or any of these other major cities with that few troops. They expected the shock and awe to scare the Ukraine side into fleeing, the government to flee. That was all a show of force. That's what they expected. And for the Ukraine side, that was their first signature victory to say that's not going to work on us. And they, fought back viciously. And the Russians were undermanned. They didn't have a plan B. They weren't equipped for anything but plan A. And when the Ukraine side stood up, it was like a bloody nose and a broken arm is what they inflicted on the Russians at that time. But because Russia is what it is, this vast country with enormous amounts of natural resources and millions upon millions of military-aged males from which to draw from a military, and of course a defense industrial base that had the capacity, which was then demonstrated, to create all kinds of weapons and ammunition, the things that they need to wage a sustained war over time. Those things were all known at the time. But to say now that it's an extraordinary capacity for the Ukraine side is just ridiculous. To say that they're standing strong. I mean, we keep showing you over and over all these reports that 100,000 people, probably more, but at a minimum 100,000 men have abandoned the fight for the Ukraine side. They have lost hundreds of thousands of men killed and wounded, irreparable. They have so few people that left with which to even recruit that they're now talking about going all the way down to 18 years old because they've almost exhausted all the other classes. They have wiped out at least 2 generations of men, just severely gashed. And now then you want to go after what's left of their future by taking people who are barely kids and putting them in there. That's how bad they're scraping the bottom of the barrel, how badly they're needing this ammunition. You want to call that a success standing strong? Look, I don't know why Russia hasn't put more pressure and why they've continued to go on, especially in the last year, on this methodical, relatively slow-paced operation. But you see, even that is having success. And even though it's not the way I would have done it, it's the way that they're choosing to do it, and it's working. And over time, it has to. I mean, it's just math, folks. You have that much additional resources in a war of attrition. Listen, I just want to take a point here to say, one of the big problems that we have today is that there are so few people who understand how war works, how logistics work, what it takes to sustain combat. Too many people watch war movies or they play video games where you just turn it on and all the stuff is there and you push the buttons and missiles come out and all that kind of thing. And I think that it's a little trite to say that people think that war is like a video game, but subconsciously there is a lot of that in there because they don't know, they haven't studied it, and it's been so long since World War II, now what is it, 80 some odd years, that people have institutionally, they've forgotten. And all the people who are in power now, they've never gone through this kind of stuff. I have fought in 4 combat deployments myself. So I took part as a lieutenant in the Desert Storm operation, which had 500,000 troops and allied troops that had gone in to fight that. And I saw all the logistics that went into it. And as a part of the cavalry, we were at the front of the corps. So we had to be part of all the 7th Corps planning processes and all of the things that went into that, with putting it on the ships and the transports and the planes, all that kind of stuff. So I have personally experienced a lot of the things of war over a full career of time. And I understand these things aren't hard to figure out if you look and if you listen. And too few senior leaders in America these days seem to understand that. And unfortunately, it's not limited to the Democratic Party or the current administration. This is across the board, and that whole elite level seems to have a really bad understanding about this. Because it continued on with that. He said, Ukraine, Blinken in that last from yesterday, said that Ukraine has a path to be an independent and strong country where they can set their own security with their military. What planet is he on? And what is he smoking? Because it's got to be something, one of those two. Because he shouldn't have the excuse that he doesn't know. He's supposed to have access in briefings all the time to saying, here's all the capacities on the Ukraine side, to include the allies and the 50 nations that we use to support. And here's all the capacities on the Russian side and their allies and all the things they have. And, it's like this. It's off the chart in Russia's favor. So by what rationale can you say that? Now, you can, and some do say, well, he's just using hyperbole. He's just, spinning things. That's just what people in Washington do. He's just spinning things because they know that his time is about over, and they're going to set the stage that claims that they had Ukraine on a sustainable path that was going to end in success. And then those darn Trump people came in there and just, gave away the store. I don't know. I'm not sure if that's what he's doing, but if it is, that's abhorrent because it's a lie, not a spin. It's a lie. Let's call it what it is. And then worse than that, a lot of people don't know it's a lie. And a lot of people still to this day, hard to believe, actually believe the stuff that senior leaders say, especially those who are of their party. They think that they're telling the truth, that the Ukraine side does that. So people believe that there's a chance. So they'll say, yeah, well, sure, let's keep giving them money. Let's don't just let the Russians have it. Let's don't just hand over victory, which I've heard so many times when I've been interviewed on other television networks. And I said, no, it's not handing anything. This is just objective reality. That's where we are after nearly 3 years of war. And then the last thing that Blinken said in that last clip was that, yes, NATO is still on the table. European Union is still on the table. They're going to be able to stand on the. And he knows that nobody in NATO is going to sign up to put Ukraine in its current form or projected form as far into the future as you can see, decades. Nobody is going to allow them into NATO. But it's absurd to even say that because that's just like a red cape in front of a bull for Russia. That's the reason they went to war in the first place. You heard Lavrov himself just reiterated it today. That's why Putin took the action he did. Putin himself said that's the reason that he did that. Jens Stoltenberg, former NATO Secretary General, admitted that was the reason that he was told. They knew it ahead of time that was going to cause war, and yet they continued to do it. And so at this point, heading into the third year of this war, the end of the third year, to say, yes, NATO's still on the table, all you're doing is telling Russia, don't worry about negotiating. There's no point in it. Because the very thing that's caused you to start this war, the other side is dangling out saying this is our in-state objective. Now, that's the outgoing administration. And it's as detached from reality as they've been throughout this whole time. All this fighting has just been inconsequential and never had a chance to succeed. And to continue as long as it takes was the mantra, giving all this weapon. All it did is increase the cost of the loss for the Ukraine side. But now then here comes a new administration. So this inflection point, I mentioned at the outset of this, what is the incoming administration going to do? Well, there are circulating online and various outlets right now, three kind of, if not competing plans, three possibilities of things it could be. One is the General Kellogg plan, who's been designated by President Trump as his special envoy for Ukraine, and his plan, which came out and was discussed earlier this spring, I think in April, basically says that they want to increase aid for Ukraine if Putin doesn't come to the table, and he's saying, look, we want to have a negotiated settlement, but we kind of want it on our terms, and if you're not willing to quote play ball, then we'll continue to put more pressure on you by giving Ukraine side more to increase the cost until you finally buckle and come to the table. Now, all of these plans suffer from one common theme, which I'm going to get to in a second, but let me show the other two first. Gary, if you can put that one back up there. Then the other one is Vice President Vance. Vice President-elect Vance has one plan that he's been floating around, who is U.S. Senator, was opposed to Ukraine aid and floated a separate idea in September. He told the U.S. podcaster Sean Ryan that a deal likely would include a demilitarized zone, sort of like the DMZ in between North and South Korea. The existing front lines would then be heavily fortified to prevent further Russian incursions. And he notably did distinguish himself by certainly the current administration of saying there would be no NATO membership on the table. And then the last one is Richard Grenell, who was a former Trump ambassador to Germany, advocated the creation of, quote, autonomous zones in eastern Ukraine. So basically kind of saying, hey, you know what, like the Donbass, we'll just call that autonomous zones. So kind of Kiev can claim that it owns it. And he also is not for NATO membership to any version of what's happened here. But here's the problem. All three of these things are from our perspective. We're not talking to the other side. We're not in negotiation. We're not even listening to the other side. And anyone who listened to the other side would have seen the latest, the specific one from June 14th, when Vladimir Putin came out and expressly said, all four of the regions that we have annexed, all the territory. That means you have to evacuate some of the territory that Ukraine currently possesses in those. There will definitely be no NATO. It will be a neutral state, and those are the entry points. So if we're not even willing to start with that, then Russia says, then there's nothing to negotiate. There won't be any. And Putin repeatedly has said, Lavrov has repeatedly said that any negotiations, and they continue to say, we're open to negotiations. We are willing to talk to Kellogg or Grenell or vice president, anyone. We'll talk, but only so far as it reflects ground truth reality. That's one of the real problems with it, is that they don't look at it from the Russian perspective. What none of these people have talked about, at least not publicly, hopefully behind the scenes with vice president or the president-elect, they're actually doing this, but at least publicly so far, everything that's been reported, no one has explained why the Russians would accept any of these deals. Just imagine. I've already shown you how the fundamentals of war are decisively and irrevocably on Russia's side. That should be the starting point of your understanding. Now then, the side that is up here is continuing to roll and methodically just chew up territory and personnel, and they've got millions more where all this come from. No matter what their actual casualties are, they're very high. But whatever they are, whether they're astronomical or merely high, it doesn't matter, because there's no shortage of people on the other side. Russia considers this an existential fight, and there is no question that anybody in Russia has any thoughts about quitting or stopping the war, or they just want to do whatever it takes to end it. No, they all want their security. They said all the blood that we've shed, all the expenses that we've made, all the suffering that our people have done because of all the sanctions and everything else, we will get something on the end that is commensurate with the price that we've already paid. They don't have, here's what you understand too. Russia does not have to negotiate anything. They want to, they're willing to. They don't have to. Ukraine has to. The West has to negotiate, or we risk literally losing the war outright. Surrender terms. That's what's going to be the net. That's what we're facing. And President Trump needs to know this before he gets into office, and whatever his envoys or group or whoever he's going to send, they all need to understand that we need a negotiated settlement. Ukraine needs one, but Russia doesn't. Because if they don't get there, if we're not even willing to say we're going to enter the negotiations at your minimum level here to try and get anything else, then Russia will simply say, appreciate you guys coming over here. Enjoy your flights back. Nothing's going to change. Because if they need to, and they are already equipped to do it, they have the resources to do it, all the logistics, the manpower, the pipelines are all fully operational. They can just ignore everything everyone's saying and then continue sweeping on into, even if it takes another year. I doubt that the Ukraine side could hold out that long. But if it did, Russia could do it. They could continue making the sacrifices and paying the price, and they have the resources to do it. Ukraine doesn't. Ukraine doesn't have it. I mean, if they did start to allow 18-year-olds to go and join the army, all they're going to be doing is increasing dramatically the cost of the loss. And at some point, the army will just break, because they're not just going to commit national suicide. At some point, they will recognize that this isn't going to work. Russia won't have that problem. Even if the casualties stay at the same high rate, their culture, their history, and their current dynamics on the ground, political and every other way, will keep paying that. And anyone who thinks that's going to change is just rolling the dice of fantasy gambling with the lives of the Ukrainians. That's one of the other things that's really obviously you can tell it kind of gets my goat a little bit, is that so many in the West want to say, yeah, just keep going. Boris Johnson, we showed him on a show yesterday from an interview a week or so ago on British radio, where he's like, yeah, just keep going. Just keep on doing this as long as it takes. Even if we have to send British troops in there, whatever, we'll just keep going. Oblivious to the fact that doing that just continues to just whittle away at the lifeblood of the state of Ukraine. See, there's a point between you can get to where the state itself could just decay and die, because, I mean, most European nations already have an issue with the birth rates and the sustainment rate that over time is going to cause some real demographic problems. But man, you go and then you gut this country and just gash whole categories of aged men. I mean, who's going to repopulate the place at anything close that's going to keep it from imploding, if they can even arrest all of this terrible economic damage that's been done? And then, and who knows how that's going to be fixed on the backside. That's already going to be a gargantuan problem that can get worse if we keep going on with the fiction. So whether it's the current administration and the ridiculous things they're saying on the way out, or the incoming administration who has the right idea, but so far they're not looking at the ground truth reality. If Trump comes in and does something that Doug McGregor said on our show yesterday, which is, all right, we're going to have an immediate cessation of no more equipment, no more weapons, no more anything else. Now it's just negotiating the best deal we can get. Then there is plausibility that the Russian side could say, okay, we'll have a ceasefire. We'll stop the killing right away. That is possible. That's something that can be done. And as long as Trump is willing to come in and his team to say, we recognize the realities, and Trump can be the master negotiator, the best one on the planet, but he still has to have leverage. And right now, he's got a pitiful small hand of leverage that he's going to be given when he takes office. And the Russian side has buckets of leverage. And you can't negotiate with somebody who's got a little cup of leverage here against somebody who's got a bucket over there and think that you're going to get a deal that's good for Kiev. That train has left the station, folks. There will be no deal that's good for Kiev. What they're faced with now, I'm telling you the harsh reality. I'm not spinning anything. I'm not telling anybody happy stories or optimistic hope. Here is the hardcore reality. There is no good outcome for Ukraine at this point. There is no end result that Zelensky will like, that authority in Ukraine will like. That doesn't exist. What they can do now, stop the bleeding, stop the sacrifice of their future, stop the destruction of the manpower that they're going to need to rebuild once this thing is over. That is in their power to do. That Trump, if he's wise and a good negotiator, he can get done. Because the Russian side does have motivation to end the war. They do have reason to end the war. So Trump is not empty-handed. It's a small one, but it's not empty. And if it's played well, then he can negotiate something that can end the war and at least have the best terms possible for Ukraine. But it's going to require recognizing reality. And that I want to leave you with that. I want to state one more time, Russia doesn't need a negotiation. They can just keep on going with what they're doing until eventually they grind the Ukrainian military to dust and then issue surrender terms. They can do that. We need to understand that before anybody comes in and think that Trump is going to have some magic negotiating dust that he's going to sprinkle over this and get something that's good. That's just not how the hardcore reality of war works in the real world. Spin can work up to a certain point, and we've seen it, at least on your domestic population. But folks, no spin on the world is going to change the dynamics that exist on the battlefield. And that is where we are. Thank you very much for coming and watching our show today. We really, even though it's kind of a dark topic, we want to make certain that everybody knows what we're really facing here, even the incoming administration. We need to have we need to understand it and set proper expectations. Expectation management is always key. If you have the right one, at least something relatively good can be obtained. We'll see how it works out, and we will keep you apprised of everything that happens. Want to make you certainly aware again that we're on podcasting world now, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Podcast Addict. Just type in Daniel Davis Deep Dive and you'll find us waiting there for you. And also just kind of a reminder, we're still waiting for Tucker Carlson to drop his interview with Sergei Lavrov. And as soon as that does, we will give you this, the quickest analysis of exactly what that says and any significant things that may come out of that. We'll let you know as soon as it does. So be keeping, as soon as you hear that, come to our channel and you'll probably find a note there of when we're going to come on the air, because we will take care of you. Thanks a lot. We'll see you on that episode of the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.